Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast about historical witch trials and the modern persecution of people accused of witchcraft. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. In this International Women's Day Special Edition, we revisit the intriguing story of Arminda de Jesus. When we think of witch burnings, most of us picture distant centuries. But today, we're exploring a case that challenges everything we think we know about when witch hunts ended.
In 1933, in the small Portuguese village of Soalhaes, a 32-year-old mother of two named Arminda de Jesus was accused of witchcraft by her neighbor, a woman she had spent years caring for during illness. What followed was a scene of intense brutality in 20th century Europe.
Today, we're sharing a portion of our interview with Dr. Inês Tadeu from the University of Madeira, who has been working to uncover Arminda's story and ensure she is not forgotten.
We bring this to you on International Women's Day to point out that witchcraft accusations have continued and remained a form of gender-based violence towards women. This tragic incident occurred 22 years after the first International Women's Day was observed.
Arminda was killed on February 25, 1933, just 92 years ago. Not many generations have passed, but the tale is already obscure. However, through trial records, newspaper accounts, and her own research visits to Soalhães, Dr. Tadeu brings this powerful story to light.
As we continue to document witch persecutions happening around the world today, Arminda's case reminds us that the mechanisms of fear and scapegoating that drive witch hunts persisted well into the modern era and continue to threaten vulnerable individuals today.
Through this episode, we seek to honor Arminda's memory and recognize her humanity. By saying her name and acknowledging her suffering, we take a small but crucial step toward justice for all victims of witchcraft accusations.
Content warning. This episode contains descriptions of violence and murder.
We believe it's crucial to remember stories like Arminda de Jesus, not just as historical events, but as warnings about how quickly fear can turn to violence in any era.
We're grateful to Dr. Tadeu for sharing this powerful story and shining a light on this important case.
Arminda de Jesus. So she was 32 years old and the mother of two little children, Manuel and Evangelina. And she was, at the time, her husband was in Brazil, as it was very often in Portugal at that time. The wives would stay with the children and the husbands would migrate to places like Brazil or Venezuela or etc. And she listed as being a farmer, but not in the sense of owning the farm. She was a laborer that would work at farms. Like they did that a lot at that time as well. They didn't own the farm, but they would work and get paid per day. And she lived right next door to another lady called Joaquina. And Joaquina, unfortunately, also in her 30s, 37, slightly older, and she had actually 6 children. The youngest was still a toddler, not even, it was an infant at the time this whole thing happened. But she had been known for years to suffer these crises. You have different descriptions of it, but if you put it all together, it seems to me that she was epileptic, at least, in the very least, because she would have these shakes and no one could control her, but she would also go into screaming and shouting and saying that she was being tormented. She was, to the naked eye, to the untrained eye, she looked afflicted, really, it seemed. If we, again, based on the different accounts, she almost probably was, I don't know, bipolar or something like that. I don't know. The way that they go on about it. And this had been going on for 3 to 4 years. She would just collapse and then have these crises. And while that was happening, Arminda, her next door neighbor, would actually come over, take care of her. Arminda would babysit the kids because she had her own children. They still were also young. Joaquina's children were also young. She would also do that. She would nurse Joaquina back to health. This is the accounts that you get from the different the trial records, and as well as the newspapers as well. So I wish I could show the picture, but you know what I'm talking about. They really literally live next to each other. It's like as close as possible, right? And But that particular year, 1933, Joaquina got really, really bad. It got worse. The crisis got worse. And she kept on saying she's being afflicted. And it just went on. And her husband didn't know what to do. So he asked his brother-in-law. And you might ask, why would he ask that person? Well, that person, based again on the accounts, he seemed to think of himself as, I wouldn't say a witch doctor, but at least what Black Court called the unwitcher. He felt himself like being the person in that area who could help with certain things, because people were starting to think she really was afflicted by spirits, by evil spirits. They didn't think that maybe she needed a doctor or anything. No, because the way that she would act, it just felt like it has to be something else. It can't just be health related, right? So Anastasio Pereira came over with his trusted book, the Book of Saint Cyprian, one of those books that in Portugal you just do not say the name and you do not buy it because it's dangerous. He did some prayers and he did some smudging with olive tree leaves and rosemary bush. It's a very traditional thing in Portugal to smudge the houses with rosemary bush or drink the tea to protect you from evil spirits as well. It's a very, very normal thing. And he tried to do that, but Joaquina didn't respond. She didn't get better. Eventually, and this is interesting because in the trial, they don't mention that, the trial records, but in the newspapers they do. They eventually called a series of witches. 3 different witches came. None of them, so known, when I say witches, I mean wise women from the neighboring towns. They couldn't help until this one came, this Olivia person, and she was the one who actually went to give her account. And she's like, yes, I'm sorry, but Joaquina is possessed. There's 2 spirits. There's a good one and a bad one. And there's no way to solve this. She's going to be like this forever. But Anastasia insisted. He wanted to help, right? So they did these sessions in that particular month. So the whole thing happened on the 25th of February. So the last days leading up to the 25th, they did a series of, they would invite the family over and they were doing like these prayers, like these rituals at our place. Like they would read from the book and pray from the book and do the smudging. And they did it for a few nights. And what's interesting is this, because there's 2 conflicting accounts, but one actually shows this. Arminda was part of that. She liked her neighbor. She wanted to help Joaquina. She was also in those prayers leading up to the 25th. But on that particular night, she was late for whatever reason. She wasn't there at the same time as everyone else. So everyone else was already experiencing all these things where they were, Joaquina was giving them instructions to lie on the ground, and they would, and they look as if they were dead, and then they would come back to life. It was this whole production, this whole show, right? And then that's when she walked in on that particular night, that Saturday, 25th of February, the weekend before what in Portugal we celebrate as being Carnival. And she walked in, and as she was asked to lie on the ground, she had a bad reaction. We can't possibly guess what it was, right? We can only imagine. And again, these are trial records, people saying things, right? And someone took the notes down. We will never know the details unless you were actually there, right? That's always the issue. And she had a bad reaction. She herself started having some sort of affliction. She started laughing. She started crying. She started reacting badly. She started saying she could see these little lights. And at that moment, Joaquina decided that Arminda, who had just walked in and had that bad reaction, she's possessed. And I'm possessed because she's possessed. So if you want to help me, you have to do something about Arminda. And that's where everything took a really bad turn to the worse. Anastasia went with it. And at first, they beat her up. They dragged her out of the house. Not only these men that were all related to Joaquina, but Arminda's brother was also in that group of people who dragged her out of the house. His name was José Monteiro. And they first beat her with it's like these tree branches, these quince sticks, like with these sticks. And those sticks were actually included in the trial evidence. And one of them was actually broken So they really hit her as hard as possible with those sticks to the point of breaking those sticks, right? And what the whole instruction was, oh, she has to be beaten until she says, "Ay, meu Deus, oh my God." And then they'll say they stopped. She said that, of course, who wouldn't, right? And they drag her back in. And Joaquina kept on saying, no, she's still possessed. They drag her back out. This is just, every time I say this, it really gets to me, the whole thing. And they dragged her back out again, and they carried on with the beating. But this time, José Monteiro, her brother, was already horrified by this. And he started saying, I think he started to intervene. And that's when he claims that they threatened him. If you do anything to stop us, you next, basically. He just left her. He left her. He left her to their devices. And that's when they went and started a fire because she was unconscious, and they just put dried pine needles over her, and they just started the fire. This is where the accounts differ. Some say that it was Joaquina kept on saying to do that. Others say that Anastasio was the one behind it, the unwitcher guy. The point is, the fire was started, and this woman who was still alive got burned to death, and no one stopped it. And most people fled in horror. But there's one freakish account that says that actually Joaquina's family were just there looking at it. And they all insist, this is the part that I don't know if they just got together and all came up with the same story, or this is the part where did they really believe? They all insist that they truly believed she was going to come back to life the next day. That they were it was a ritual by fire to get rid of the supposed demons, whatever that she had, in order to save Joaquina, right? Others insist that Joaquina was the master of everything. Why did they listen to her? We will never know. Joaquina later is deemed unfit to stand trial because she was institutionalized, and they actually believed that she wasn't in her right mind, so she couldn't stand trial. And she had also conflicting information. She would either say, no, I didn't do anything. Or she would say that I have no recollection from that period. Like from the period of 20-something in February all the way through to April, I have no recollection of what happened in my life during that time because I was so ill. But there's also other accounts that she was destroying the room in the institution, like with her hands. She would tear apart the bedding and all that stuff. So it's, again, unless we actually go and check out those records, which I don't even know where to begin, we don't know. All I know is that why would this group of men listen to this woman so easily? And it has to be, you have to kind of come to grips with, they must have really believed what they were doing. However, the Portuguese authorities struggled with the whole superstition thing, and they tried to find two other avenues for motive. One of the avenues was that Anastasio Pereira had borrowed money from Arminda and her husband, and they wanted to see that maybe that's why he forced the whole situation, so he didn't have to pay back the money. However, they couldn't find any indication that Arminda was asking for the money back, and she actually had a nice, hefty bank account apparently at the time, and they didn't see a reason for it that she was pestering Anastasia with that. Another avenue was, and this is interesting because this was suggested by Arminda's widower because he came from Brazil soon after, and he still spoke to the authorities, and he was at the trial as well. And he was convinced that Joaquina wasn't crazy and she knew exactly what she was doing because Joaquina had asked Anastasio's wife to go and tell the people that there was going to be a miracle at our house. Like she was premeditating something. That's what he suggested. However, when it came to the trial, it just came down to superstition and a gruesome death, but they still considered it involuntary manslaughter. I don't know, how is that? And the reasons, the defense uses reasons such as, oh, these poor men, yeah, they did what they did, but they are poor and they are stupid and they are superstitious and it's like all these reasons. It's like, I'm sorry, an innocent woman was killed brutally. I don't care about those kind of, oh, they were superstitious. Yeah. After that happened during that night, again, conflicting account. Some say her body was just left there for 2 days. No one did anything. At the doorsteps of Joaquina. And that someone addressed Joaquina, what is this? And that she just casually said, I don't know. It's all horrifying. Others say that the next morning, someone had covered the body with a blanket or something. And people were coming over to see the horrifying scene, to check, was this Arminda? Because everyone knew her. She was a good neighbor. She was loved in that area. No one had a complaint. At least you can't find in the records. No one said, oh, she was mean. Nothing like that. Everyone keeps on saying, no, we loved her. She was such a good person. And there's also one that claims that Anastasio, the unwitcher guy, had come over the next morning and he had a pickaxe, and they were wondering if he wasn't going to just get rid of her remains. But there were so many people around, apparently, that he didn't have a chance. The interesting thing is that when they finally called what in Portugal at that time we used to call o regedor, it's like the closest thing I can think in American culture is like the sheriff, the town sheriff kind of thing. Right? It's a small area away from the authorities. So you have this little sheriff guy, and he arrested them, and Anastasio was the only one who resisted arrest. She tried to escape. All the others were just, yeah, we did it, and we're sorry, and we really thought that she was going to come back to life. And he was the only one who didn't want. He tried to, but then he confessed. They all confessed. Yeah, but we thought we were doing something good. We were helping Joaquin and we were helping Arminda. That's the way that it comes out in the trial. Yeah, that, and then they were found. So the trial took a year, more or less. So between the inquiry and all that, it was a year later that it took place in 1934, May 1934. And it was I would say it's a short trial compared to what happened today, or because it was 1 day for all the witnesses, and then they had to postpone, and then a second day for so the closing arguments and the decision. And the second day was actually at Mark Canavia's show. Everyone came to watch it. Everyone from around there came to see that. And then at 8:00 at night, I can't imagine a court being open at 8:00 at night today, but at that time, the sentence came out, and they were sentenced. They were all found guilty, and they were sentenced to over 20 years in jail, or they had the option of being exiled to one of the Portuguese colonies. It was a very common thing at the time. You would be sent basically to the edge of the empire kind of thing. And could be Mozambique or Angola or São Tomé and Príncipe also happened, the islands, the African islands. But apparently they chose to stay in Portugal. And they also had to pay, each one of them, the whole of them, the three men had to pay actually a form of restitution to Arminda's family. And it was quite high for the time. 6,000 escudos, so like 6,000. I can't even imagine what that is in today's money. I will have to figure that out. But at that time, it was a lot of money. And again, made me mad to find out again that they didn't stay in prison for the whole sentence, because of 13 years later, 13 years later, there was all sorts of amnesties, and they were given the right they were released. So this woman died the way she did, gets forgotten by everyone, including her family. And these men just got 13 years and went on with their lives. And when the family they really didn't discuss it at all. There was this, in one of the newspaper reports, someone who claimed to the newspaper, to the reporter, that he actually knew he was a nephew by marriage of Angelina's son. And he says, I've never heard Manuel ever speaking about his mother. I don't know if it's the trauma and you just don't want to deal with it, or if it's the shame that you believe that she actually was. I don't know what it is, but to me, it's the family didn't memorialize her either at all. The fact that those houses are still standing is actually amazing. You would think that they would have taken those houses brick by brick down, but apparently Joaquina must have carried on her life as well. I haven't found information if she was institutionalized for the rest of her life or she carried on with her life, because her husband went to prison. So who was going to take care of her and her children? I really want to go down that rabbit hole, find out more about that. But those houses are standing there, right? And people know that nothing happened there. For me, it was because I do that a lot. When I went to Salem, when I went to Pendle Hill, and I like to go and experience the area. Of course, it's 20th century. It's not the same, but I still like to go there and have that feeling. And for me, it was shocking. I kept on telling the lady of the council, the people who assisted me, so this is it. They were that close. I kept on repeating myself because I can't understand. Or maybe I can, I don't know. How can people who were so close in every possible way do that to each other and carry on with their lives because they were so convinced that they were doing the right thing? It's scary. But for me, what's more scary and more sad is no one talks. They don't even know about her name there. They actually, from the conversations, a few conversations I had, they seem to conflate the two, Joaquin and Arminda. They just say, oh, she was the crazy lady who was possessed by the demons. And I'm like, wait, no, which one is the crazy? Joaquin was the one who was known as being the crazy, Atula, the fool. Well, that's not Arminda. Arminda was the other one. But it's all conflated. It's all confused. And one of the people, the young woman that was assisting me, that took me around, she went to law school, and she was also telling me that her colleagues from other universities, such as University of Coimbra, which will study. They actually study this case because in the law, it's one of those examples. What do we do with this? How would we defend this? How would we judge this? But in Porto, which is the district of Soalhães, no one touches that. It's not part of the curriculum. And it's like, why does one university, that particular university? So there's a lot of unanswered questions for me. I think there's still a lot of work. I'm surprised that like I said, I'm not an historian. I'm surprised that no historian in Portugal has picked up on it, go through anything, dig it up. I'm going to try and see if I can do more, because recently I found another interesting article, not directly about Arminda and her story, but that the New York Times in 1929 reported that Portugal was having a hard time controlling their witches. And it's not a joke, because I actually thought, is this a joke? That they were trying to, the Portuguese authorities in 1925 at 29 were trying to teach the population to not resort to witches, and they couldn't stop it. They were struggling with it. That's another interesting rabbit hole that I want to go down, because I want to understand, really? I've never read anything about that. Again, in Portugal, unfortunately, with the exceptions of, like I mentioned, Pina Cabral, or another one is Pedro Paiva, very few historians have dedicated themselves to witchcraft or the witch hunts, to be more precise, or any cases. There are cases, but there's very little even paid attention to. It just gets dismissed and disregarded. It's like, yeah, it was just a fluke, or I don't know. But for me, I don't know why. It just, I don't understand how it can just be forgotten like that. How? I don't understand. It should be part of the cultural memory of that place. This person was treated like this, right?
It's quite a powerful story, and it should be known. It's important
Yeah.
to know that these things still happen, and so we can try and do something about them. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for joining us on Witch Hunt.
You should check out our robust catalog of expert discussions.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.